Okay, guys, so welcome to this morning's Fife Property Show. It's 9:30, it's a Saturday morning, and boy, have we got a show for you. Buy to let finance, optimise your portfolio's cash flow, yield, and profit. Remember, profit is vanity, turnover is sanity, or something like that, and cash flow is king. That's the most important point. Cash flow is king. I've got Kessler laughing in the green room there. I'm coming out with all these buzzwords this morning. Could you imagine if you had a portfolio at £5 million and property prices are going up by 20% in the next 4 years? You will literally make £1 million and be paid to wait because you're renting them at the same time. That's 250,000 a year right on your bottom line just because you were paid to wait as well at the same time. This business and asset class is amazing. You would not believe the results you can compound at the end of this. This is a recession-proof business. Remember, you've got a guy here that went through the credit crunch. My property values decreased, but my income stayed exactly the same. And on occasion, it actually went up as a result. So therefore, credit crunch, what credit crunch? That's the reality. Compare that today to a pension. Has your pension increased by 209% in the last 20 years? Has it increased by 50% in the last 10 years? Has it increased by 30% or 25% in the last 5 years? And have you still continued to get an income out of it? I don't know that answer. You can only know that yourself, because that's what property prices have gone up in these years. So you're literally paid to wait in this business with this asset class. It is the best performing ever. Good morning, James. And I know you're going to be listening as well. And so who have I got on today with me? I've got the lettings director of Fife Properties. I've got Richard Cook today.
Morning, Jim.
How are you?
I'm really good this morning. So you're excited about this?
Fired. I get excited. I get extremely excited when I talk about property, especially when I understand the dynamics and I see where things are going. And it's almost, you could almost predict the future when you're in property. It is almost a guaranteed recession-proof business. People want property when we're in a recession because they need to rent. The lack of housing supply, they need to rent. And the lack of houses getting built, they need to rent. So regardless of the economy, the rental market still booms. Okay, so who else have we got on this morning? We've got Kessa Salimi of Freedom Financial. Kessa, how are you this morning?
I'm very good, Jim. How are you?
All right, are you as excited as me?
Yeah, I was loving your introduction there, especially the cash flow is king. I love that, especially versus cash, because often people think cash is king versus cash flow is king. So I like that.
It is cash flow, really, at the end of the day. You know yourself. It's like that's what turns the business. All business models should really, in my opinion, be built on cash flow, because cash flow is the lifeblood of a business. It's not profit and it's not turnover. I could be more profitable than one of the loss-making companies. When the banks were making a loss and they were turning over billions of pounds of money, I was more successful than them, even though I was making maybe £1 in profit, because I was making profit and they were making a loss. So even a small business could outperform a huge business like that. Let's say some good mornings. Good morning, Charlotte. How are you? And good morning, Angela. How are you? Guys, feel free to ask any questions you want. Let's kick this off, because it's going to be a good show. I could tell. I could feel it. So buying one or more property rental homes can give you an additional income now. I mean, that's a really good thing. The plan for the financial freedom, and plus simply owning a property isn't enough by itself. Be sure to maximize your yield and protect the value of your portfolio. The financial management of your rental homes is an essential part of being a successful landlord. Who wants to be a landlord and who wants to be a property investor? I think I'd do the latter. What about you, Kessler?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, yeah, that's the way I view myself, a property investor first of all. I think sometimes landlord has a negative connotation, but like you said earlier on, the rental market isn't going anywhere anytime soon, and we serve, we've just seen, that's 25 years now of the buy-to-let mortgages being available, so it just shows how much that market's grown, as your statistics have said.
I remember when buy-to-let never existed.
Yeah.
That's how long I've been in this. There was no such thing. Every bank manager used to laugh at me when I mentioned about renting property. Yeah, it was like the computer says no sometimes.
Yeah, there is a big difference between a landlord and an investor. I mean, anybody really could be a landlord, and a lot of people are by accident. But an investor, obviously, they're looking at the financial long-term gains of building a portfolio. So there is a big difference.
Yeah, I mean, there's so many ways to use your buy-to-let funding to optimise the performance of your properties. So if you're thinking about buying a rental home in the Fife area or anywhere else in the country, because really the dynamics, we talk about this all the time because it is the Fife Property Show, but this is actually nationwide, if not worldwide, this concept, of buying property and an investment income and a continuous stream of income while you wait for the capital to appreciate over time. But all the money really and all the dynamics should go into the cash flow element of it. And in my opinion, the capital is a bonus. That's how I look at it. So, what's your thoughts on that, Richard?
Yeah. I mean, obviously, the capital gain is a bonus, and I think if you're going to be an investor, you need to look at it for the long term, and the cash flow over that period, and expanding your portfolio, and looking at obviously what kind of equity you have in your portfolio as it stands just now. At the moment, there's never been a better time to kind of MOT your portfolio and take money out and expand your portfolio. And I'm sure you'll agree with that, Kessler, obviously dealing with mortgages and things at the moment and mortgage rates.
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, just kind of going back to what Jim said earlier on, cash flow is king. Capital appreciation definitely I view is a bonus as well. And I've seen my property portfolio grow in value over the last 10 years of investing, which has been great. But ultimately, I was investing sort of pre-2008 as well, and I also saw kind of property prices dip. But like Jim said earlier on, if your cash flow is strong, that will kind of ride you through that, and it'll kind of continue to properties will rent out. Which then allows property prices to recover over time, and then you can take advantage of that capital appreciation too.
What's your thoughts on releasing the income all the time?
Yeah, I think it's a great strategy for a lot of property investors. The good thing is, from the lending point of view, there is kind of background stress test that they have to do on the rental income, not at today's very low interest rates or future interest rates of 5.5%. You can only typically sort of extract up to sort of 75% of the value of your portfolio as well. So that gives you a 25% equity in your property at all times. So just in case property prices do dip, because that can always happen too. So I think there's a lot of kind of fail safes in there, to make sure that you do invest wisely, if you are extracting equity out. But it definitely kind of helps you to build your portfolio quite quickly, because it's sometimes quite difficult to save up for each deposit. So if you've got equity in your properties, extract that and then use that for future investments is definitely a good choice for a lot of people.
It's a good strategy for portfolio building. You have to be aware though there'll be a deferred capital gain, because effectively what you're doing is you're taking all the money out on the mortgages, and then over a period of time the value of the property is going up, but then the capital gain is still based on the original purchase price. Therefore, you could end up paying more tax, and as a result of getting less money, if you exit the market and actually be left with a larger mortgage. That could happen, and it has happened on occasions for some landlords before. I still even have some properties like that myself, but it doesn't matter because I've got it spread over a wide range. So if you're holding long term, it's completely irrelevant.
Yeah, I have seen that with a few landlords over the years, and there is still some like that. And like you say, Jim, you've got some of your own, but it isn't really a big problem because you've got that long term factor with the property anyway. So
we've got a quick question coming in from Jennifer. With the market's riding so high in Fife at the moment, do you think it's a good time to buy? Absolutely.
Yes.
You know the answer to everything about it now is when's the best time to buy? It's always now.
No.
She says, I worry about the property not holding its current value. Well, it depends on your strategy. If you're thinking about doing it short term, then yes, you've every right to be worried. If it's long term, if it's over 10 years, then we know property prices in Fife have actually grown by 46% in the last 10 years. In the last 20 years, they've gone up 209%. So, if you're holding it long-term strategy, I wouldn't worry at all, Jennifer. It's fine. And if it's just for you to live in and then resale, the proportionate amount of the property value will be the same proportionate amount if you go to the next property. So in other words, in the credit crunch, classic example is a lot of people had maybe 50% value in their property and equity. The credit crunch, 20% dropped off, 30% was left. But guess what? When they sold that house, they got that money, and then they went to a house which is exactly the same proportionately in terms of the value. So it's completely irrelevant if you are living in the property yourself. If it's a buy-to-let strategy, then that's the thing. If you're holding it long term, property values have always gone up. Go back to your grandparents if they're still here and say to them, "Did you wish you'd bought property?" And I'll bet you the answer would have been yes. Because if you go back, it's like I was talking to somebody yesterday, and it says 30 years ago I bought a property for like £1,000, and he says it's gone up almost 30 times in that time, and it's like, oh my god. What does that tell you? Yeah, Jennifer says buy-to-let. Yeah, absolutely. Buy-to-let values over a long period of time, medium to long term, will always hold value. And it's understanding the model and the dynamics in order to make sure it's like what Kessler and what Richard says, cash flow is king. It's to make sure you're structured correctly in order for the cash to come every single month, so you don't plan on the capital appreciation really. And for me, it's always looked as a byproduct of the actual cash that's coming in every month. James has actually made a good comment. Often when you get a downturn, the bounce back is stronger. Like any investment, you have to be in it for the long term. Absolutely. Long term, Kessler, is that you?
Absolutely. Yeah, I don't plan to sell any of my properties in the short term, to be honest. The properties that I've all bought over the last 10 years, I'm still holding on to and will continue to hold on to unless they kind of perform badly. So absolutely, it's the long term for me. And the question kind of posed there earlier on, is now the right time to buy? I mean, even if we kind of rewind back to the beginning of COVID, when that hit, everybody's kind of thinking then property prices are going to crash, and look what's happened now. And we could still be in the same situation a year from time as well, because there's a lot of people out there that are holding off to buy at the right time, and then we've seen property prices charging on, and things again, property prices are rising over that time, and they kind of feel like they're missing out.
Let me be clear about this. I have got a friend that's been talking about getting into buy-to-let for the last 20 years. 20 years ago, when I was buying property, he thought about it. He has still not bought property today. Since 20 years have passed, my properties have gone up 3 and 4 times in value, and he is still thinking about it. There's my answer. Buy-to-let is the best asset class you can ever have. It pays you to wait for the appreciation in value, and it's a great earner at the same time. Anyway, let's talk about buy-to-let lending. This is your specialist point. This is why Kesser's on the show. We're all going to sit and look at Kesser. You're going to be on the spot. Buy-to-let lending at a glance. Let's look at this. Buy-to-let mortgages are slightly different to standard residential loans. Checking your credit rating, consider your credit rating and lending in the first place. Banks also take into account expected rental income alongside property, the sales valuation as well. So what else do we need to look for in buy-to-let lending criteria, Kesser?
A lot of different things, but like you said, it's very different to residential lending. Income is a factor, like your own personal income, but it's secondary. The main thing that they look at is the rental income of the property, what the property will rent out for. So a valuer will go out and value the property, but will also put a rental income on that. And the lenders will do like a background stress test on that to make sure the property will rent out, cover any void periods, any tax.
When you say a stress test, what does that mean to me? What does that mean to the general layman?
Yeah, so a good question. So basically, the lender will do a calculation. Typically, if you're buying in your personal name, they will stress test the rent at 145%.
Oh, wow.
So it's quite a kind of a large coverage. So an extra 45% of the rent they need to kind of cover any extra bills that you might have. So this could be kind of void periods, any tax bills, and then not at today's low interest rates, but potentially future interest rates of 5.5%. And if it fits that stress test, then which is a lot worse than what the situation is just now, then the lender will lend up to sort of 75% or 80% of the value of the property.
So this used to be 125%, didn't it? So why all of a sudden has it just been changed overnight to 145? Are we seeing all these things that happened in the last credit crunch creep in over time?
Well, to be honest, it's changed since your legislation changed on the way interest is deducted from your profits, and this only applies for buying in personal name, and doesn't always apply for basic rate taxpayers. Typically, it applies for higher rate taxpayers or sometimes portfolio landlords, which is somebody who has 4 or more properties. But in my opinion, if you base it on the 145% at worst case scenario, even if you are a basic rate taxpayer, it kind of it kind of shows you what worst case scenario, at least your property will kind of cash flow really. But if you buy in limited company, they only stress test at the 125%.
So if we're buying a property and the mortgage monthly payment is £1,000, then we're really looking for a minimum rental income of £1,250.
Yeah.
Yeah, at least.
Then if it's portfolio or if it's in your own name and you're a higher rate taxpayer, it potentially could be £1,450.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. Okay. So lenders usually work, and you've said yourself, on a maximum 75% loan to value the purchase price. Are we doing 80% now? And if 80% is available, is it going to make? Is it going to be higher rates? I mean, that's a classic example, isn't it? It's usually higher rates, more risk, higher rates. Is that what we're experiencing just now?
Absolutely. So 80% was definitely available sort of pre-COVID, and now is very much back as well. But yeah, they do charge a premium for that, and quite a high premium as well. Typically around 1% higher for 80% loan to value. So yeah. It's not a kind of great strategy for most people, because often that 5% extra is not usually worth that extra 1% that they're going to charge on the interest. But it could be kind of a great sort of a great addition for some people that maybe just can't stretch that 25% deposit. But overall, my personal sort of opinion is try to kind of keep your portfolio around 75% loan to value or lower if you can.
What do you think the best mortgage product just now on the market is?
Oh, there's so many good ones. So I mean, in personal name, there's some fantastic products available at 75% loan to value, and often you're not even kind of benefiting from taking a lower loan to value because the rates are much better at say 70 or 60% loan to value. So, yeah, it's quite a wide question that, there's so many good products out there, and even in limited company, we're seeing limited company products get so competitive now. They are slightly more expensive than personal name, but the differentiation is getting smaller and smaller. And speaking to some lenders recently, some building societies, they're looking to get into the limited company market as well. So we'll see competition increase and hopefully rates reduce as well.
Yeah, David actually makes a good morning, Dave Sleet. Does it make a difference if the buy-to-let mortgage is for a business?
Yeah, so I imagine, Dave, that what he means by that is it for a limited company? So if that's the case, then yes, it is. The rates are slightly higher, but the lender still lend based on the director and shareholder of the business. So they still kind of base it on yourself, Dave. And you could set up a business day one and get lending straight away too. Yeah.
I mean, the overall thing about the 75% purchase price and buy-to-let mortgage are loaned on interest only basis. I mean, what's your thoughts on that? Interest only or capital repayment? Or, I know what my thoughts are, but I'd be interested to hear yours.
Yeah, my personal strategy is I'm investing interest only because I'm looking to grow my portfolio. So I can kind of use that extra cash flow to buy additional properties, and I'm also trying to use inflation to erode that debt over time. So even if we take out capital appreciation, because obviously that's just a bonus, and I just base my numbers on inflation over time, I'm expecting my property prices to increase, but my debt will stay the same. If I try to go on capital repayment just now and pay my debts off in today's rates, I'm not kind of getting the benefits of inflation. Like you said, kind of speak to your grandparents and ask them what property prices were years ago. I expect kind of it'll be a similar scenario come sort of 30 years time when I review my portfolio and my loans stay the same, but due to inflation, the property prices will increase, and then I'll either maybe convert to capital repayment at that time once I've got enough cash flow coming in, or potentially I could just sell a few of my properties and pay the debt down at that time.
Yeah. Me personally, it's interest only every single time. I mean, why on earth would you want to pay down debt what you're getting at possibly 3% if you could earn, say, 25% on that same amount? That's the reality. So you're making a differential every single time on the bank's money of 22% on top line income to go towards covering overheads. That's the important thing. The key here is when I talk about overheads, I'm talking about for a managing agent. If you're a proper investor, you get a managing agent. That's the key here. You get somebody to look after it for you because you don't want to be involved in the day-to-day running. Is that right, Richard? Let me talk about the day-to-day running, Richard.
Yeah.
Day-to-day running of a buy-to-let portfolio like.
Well, it takes a lot, and listening to Kessa there, I think it's quite it's good to hear that there's so much products available and new products available out there for building a portfolio. When we're in a time it's just an ideal time for building portfolio, and I think that to hear all the different products that are available now. But I do think it's definitely, you should be looking at doing that in a limited company, and of course, initially anyway, on an interest only. But yeah, the day-to-day running, there is quite a lot.
I think
Hence,
limited company. I know you pay a bit more for a limited company, but I think limited company has to be the way forward, especially if you're taking interest-only mortgages and you're a high-rate taxpayer, because the way the government's going in terms of you can only get interest deduction at lower rate tax now on your mortgage interest if it's in your own name. That's the key here. In a limited company, it doesn't matter. It doesn't apply. So no matter how much money you make on top line, the interest is still deducted full amount, and there's no I would say there's no penalty for it being in your name. I mean, imagine that. There's two completely different systems for the taxation systems for the same process. But that's incumbrantly because they can't change the legislation on interest-only deductions for limited companies because it'll affect all the corporations. So that's why they can't change it. So every single time you're protected being in a limited company to a degree, and that's why your strategy should incorporate that. If you're only buying one or two and you're a lower rate taxpayer, then it shouldn't matter. But I do believe, and you could back me up or not on this, Kessler, if you want, I do believe that the government's going to do away with interest-only deduction in your own name completely.
Yeah, that'll be very interesting if they do that. I suppose the scope is there, absolutely. And like you said, they're not going to want to take that away in limited companies, especially because, and we're seeing just now, big corporations are looking to get into limited company, sort of buy-to-let investing as well. Lloyd's Bank, John Lewis, all these big companies as well. So it's going to be very interesting. And another consideration to take into account there as well is inheritance tax as well. So, if you do have a large portfolio, that could potentially kind of create an inheritance tax burden in the future as well. Whilst a lot of investors are investing in limited company and then potentially sort of gifting shares to family members in the future, or potentially sort of stepping aside and letting, their children take over in the future too.
Yeah. Now, James actually said a good point there. He says, especially that Lloyd's, M&S and John Lewis are entering the buy-to-let market. I'll be honest, I've seen this all before. And they quickly exited. I had the Nationwide was one of the first people into it about 25 years ago, and they built a huge development called At Home in Perth for that very reason. And lo and behold, they no longer own that. That's now somewhere else because they exited pretty quick because they didn't see any advantages in it because they couldn't run it like we ran it. I definitely believe being an agile and smaller buy-to-let investor and a smaller limited company and flexible in their approach has that ability to adapt and change to the current situation quicker than these huge conglomerates can do that. And I don't think, unless the legislation changes dramatically, I don't think it's going to be a good strategy for them long term, which is good for us because eventually they'll exit and then we could buy their portfolios. Job done. Thanks very much, M&S, for doing that for me. Anyway, let's talk about expanding your portfolio. Releasing equity. You touched on this, Kessa, is another way to fund your property, and the easiest way to expand the portfolio without eating into your personal savings. So as soon as you've got enough equity in one property to cover the 25% deposit for another without taking the borrowing the first 75% of its value, you'll be able to add another property to your portfolio funded entirely by the lender. Now, this was quite an interesting one because years ago, I actually sat in front of Scottish Homes and I had my spreadsheet in front of me and I said, in the next 30 years, I could have 100,000 properties. And they just looked quite surprised. But my spreadsheet said I did because I based it on my model and said, well, if I got that and that went up in price and I released that and released this and released that and released this. And I ended up with like, my God, I could get 100,000 properties in the next 30 years. Unfortunately, I didn't get that.
I was going to say, is that a hint to how much I'm going to have to...
Considering Fife Council is the biggest landlord in Fife with 40,000 properties, I kind of think 100,000 properties would have been a bit much. You might have to go further afield for that in terms of getting it. But it is a great strategy to release for buying more property, Kessa, isn't it?
Absolutely. Sometimes people think property investors have millions of pounds behind them, and that's how they manage to amass all these properties.
We don't all run about in Ferraris and Porsches and BMWs.
Unfortunately not. Yeah, absolutely. But it's a conception that a lot of people have, especially when they think of landlords. But yeah, a lot of us have amassed their portfolios by just, allowing properties to appreciate in time, or sometimes forcing appreciation as well by adding value to the property. And then once that property is increased in value, then raise equity. And sometimes people have equity in their own home as well, and that takes a little bit more thinking and this slightly more kind of affordability checks on that. But some people sometimes will raise equity from their own residential home to allow them to invest as well. So, yeah, having all these strings to your bow, that allows you to kind of then continue to invest again and again and buy additional properties.
Yeah. Richard, have you ever seen any of your landlords turning up in their Ferraris to give their properties to you?
Definitely not. But I think it comes back to the time is now. Really, I think, and now is never a better time to be reassessing your portfolio and looking at the equity that you have tied up in your portfolio to then expand. I think, and now is never a better time. But no Ferraris pulling up outside the office anytime soon. But I think a lot of landlords, it's a decision that you need to be smart about, and it's all about the numbers. And I think speaking to people like some things is brilliant. People are a bit apprehensive about trying to fund a portfolio through, you said obviously their own residential. I had one actually recently who had a lot of capital tied up, or equity tied up in her property, but she was very reluctant to do that because of the risk factor. And there is a risk factor, but I think as long as you speak to the right people and do it correctly, it can be a good way to start funding a portfolio.
I don't ever see it as a risk, though.
If it's done correctly, then no.
It's crazy when you think about it. Look at this concept, right? You're taking money out of a property to put it into another property.
Yeah.
How on earth is that a risk? Because if it's in the property, it's in the now, like, for example, your home, and the home drops by 20% in value, then the other property you bought is going to drop by 20% in value. If the home goes up by 20% in value, the other property you've got goes up by 20% in value. It's just that your home, you're not earning any money on, and the other property you're earning money on. Yeah. So what one are you going to put your money into? It's going to be the one you're earning your money on, and it's going up in value. So it's completely irrelevant. I mean, taking money from another one and even using that, I don't know about you, Kesser, but in the past, what I've done is I've leveraged my position by actually giving personal guarantees based on the equity I had in some properties. So I didn't need to go about releasing that, but it allowed me to get higher funding from the banks in order to get more property, even at 100% value, a loan to value. So I was actually basically getting the full thing funded from the banks. And that still can happen today, depending on your current position. So you'd be amazed what's out there and availability and the hoops that you don't really need to jump through in order to meet the criteria, because some of the lenders out there, not mainstream, some of the other lenders are actually more open to being more flexible in the way you work. Is that right, Kesser?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, those options are slightly more limited, like you said, but absolutely there is those options still available. One quite popular option that we're seeing just now, a lot of property investors are using, is what's called forward funding, which is quite similar to that, where they kind of underwrite you based on one purchase, and then you can give them the plans for the next 12 months, what you're looking to buy, and then they'll basically just sort of agree that up front. And then as you sort of add new properties to your portfolio, the sort of process is sped up because they've already kind of agreed it, prior to that.
Perfect. That's exactly how I started 30 years ago. Forward funding. It's got a name for it now.
Yeah, exactly.
All I knew about it was called term loans, and it was from the Bank of Scotland. But the disadvantage of the term loans from the Bank of Scotland at the time, they insisted I pay the equity back at the same time. So it was capital repayment vehicles, because buy-to-let mortgages didn't exist. Interest-only options didn't exist at that time either. But basically, the forward funding was a facility. So I proved the model. They then said to me, how much money do you want? I said, that's it. That's how much security you've got. Therefore, go away and start buying property then. Once we get that facility done, we'll then convert that to a proper term loan, and then we'll put that aside, and then you can start again with the model. And effectively, that's how I first started. It's got forward funding. So I've found every day is a school day.
That's why I think it's important to speak to the right people. Obviously, there'll be a lot of people out there that are unaware.
It's amazing how I'll tell you, it's amazing how many people out there actually don't realise the equity they're sitting on could actually producing a lot more money in what they are doing, and it's almost guaranteed success because it's based on a model and a principle that's been proved over years successively by numerous people beforehand, and even by myself. It's a no-brainer. It is literally a turnkey investment with almost like a certainty at the end of it, because I'll never start the journey unless I know the answer at the end. And every single time I'll know the answer, and often more than the time that I actually get a better result at the end than I actually predicted in the beginning, because I'm quite prudent and I'm quite cautious in my approach to property investment. I never realised that. I have the mantra of Monte Carlo or bust. But the reality is I'm actually quite prudent in the way I do things. So what happens, Kester, once you've acquired more than 3 buy-to-let properties? Is that the limit, and then you go to portfolio lending, or?
Yeah, so this was like a new regulation. Well, it's not that new anymore, but basically the PRA is what they call the Prudential Regulation Authority, have brought in different rules for portfolio landlords. So that's when you have 4 or more mortgage buy-to-let. So you could have, 10 properties if you like, without any lending on it, and you wouldn't be a portfolio landlord. It's just 4 or more mortgage buy-to-lets. And really kind of the main difference is that they're just checking your background portfolio to get a sense check to make sure that they're renting out for the right amount of rents, you're at the right loan to value, so typically 75% loan to value. So it's all good things. It's all kind of things to make sure you're operating your portfolio correctly. Some lenders don't lend to portfolio landlords, but predominantly most do. The only restrictions start to happen once you have more than 10 properties, then you'd be looking at more specialist lenders. But yeah, portfolio landlords, there's not really any limits there, just a few more checks. And to be honest, it's what us as mortgage brokers kind of help you sort of jump through those hoops. We kind of know what the lenders are looking for, and it's not that much onerous, or not that onerous, sorry, on the landlord.
Yeah. And do you notice I've got a pen in my hand? Ask me why. Because even I learn something new every day. And so that's exactly what I've got, my pen and paper. So I can take down all the notes at the same time. So if you're watching out there, make sure you get a pen and paper. Make sure you take it down. Even though you think you know the answer and you're going to remember the answer, the reality is you retain more information up here if you write it down at the same time as reading it. The retention rate's a lot higher. Therefore, you'll learn a lot quicker. Therefore, you'll learn a lot more. Every day is a school day.
Absolutely.
So let's look at this again. Richard, how many people have you had turning up with huge buy-to-let portfolios? What is the typical size of a buy-to-let landlord?
I mean, typically quite commonly it's 2 to 3 properties initially.
Yeah. So this myth about Ferraris and everybody runs about in Ferraris and fast cars and big massive houses and all the rest of it really is an urban myth.
Yeah, I mean, 2, 3, possibly 4, and they build to there. I've got quite a lot of landlords that have been building a lot recently, obviously due to the market that we're in just now, and adding 1 or 2, or like yourself, Jim, I think, what are you on, number 8 on 8?
13.
13. Right, okay. I'm still waiting on a couple of...
I only set a target of 8 at the start of the year, and I ended up getting 13.
Maybe that's why that figure's in my head, and I'm waiting on a couple of them to conclude. But yeah, I mean, typically it's only a handful to start with. I do have landlords that do have a lot bigger portfolios, but generally that's kind of what the figures are like in terms of numbers of properties in each portfolio.
And then, so why are they building them? What's the reason behind it? I mean, I'll ask you first, Richard. Why are people coming to you and saying, I want to get into property investment? What's the reason behind that?
I think because the market's so good at the moment, they're being smart and being brought to their attention that they have equity in the properties that they've already got, and that's facilitating, like we've just discussed, for them to expand. And they again are looking at it long term and can see the benefits of the long term cash flow.
What is the benefits to them though? I mean, why are people wanting to do this? I mean, money for money's sake is no good to you at all.
No, but I think in the long term, people are looking at obviously later years, retirement, their kids and things like that as well. Obviously, the current climate that we're in is quite uncertain, the financial side of things, and we've spoke before about how the money and property and the benefits of that in the long term. So I think people are becoming wise to that.
Yeah, it's interesting that this is a good one. So James actually said previously, we've spoken about delayed gratification in the past. We'll cover that in a wee minute. And he said, what's your target for next year? Well, the next 4 years, my target's 50. So the next 4 years, my target's 50. That's where I'm looking at for buying. So just to give you an insight into that, and if I can do it in 1 or 2 years, for me personally, my target is 50, but it depends how quick I can get these properties to get together. I mean, if somebody comes along and says you want to buy a portfolio of 50 properties, I'm in there straight away. My target's been reached, and then I'll go for another 50. So the reality is that there is no limit to what I can buy. The only limit is the availability in the marketplace to what I can get my hands on. Basically, that's what it comes down to. So that's the most important thing. Kessa, why are most people coming to you for buy-to-let funding and buy-to-let finance? Because you are the expert in this. This is your field. You are the person, the go-to person for buy-to-let finance. So why are they coming to you?
Thank you, Jim. I think a lot of people like using our business because we invest in property ourselves as well. So I wholeheartedly believe in buy-to-let. You know, it gave me financial freedom, and that's why I call the business Freedom Financial. So very passionate about this. And yeah, you know, 95% of what we do is buy-to-let mortgages. So we kind of know the ins and outs, you know, because the mortgage market is huge. You know, we've got residential mortgages, equity release, lots of different things, you know, and we can't be specialists in everything. So we've decided to kind of niche in buy-to-let and just really kind of hone down in on that and just be the specialist in that area.
Yeah. I mean, it's a huge market. When I first started out, the buy-to-let market in terms of UK housing stock was 9%. That shows you how long ago that was. Now it's sitting at 19, if not just beyond 20% in terms of the size. So the buy-to-let market has grown by about more than doubled in the time that I've been there, and it will continue to grow as a natural result. Now, why is this? Well, are we becoming more European? If you go to Germany, I mean, most of the rental properties in Germany, there's about 60% of the housing stock is rental. If you go to the Nordic regions, you know, there's about 80% of their housing stock is rental. So are we just becoming more European? That's the point here. Or is it the fact that we've always been taught that we should be a nation of homeowners, and that's why the buy-to-let market in this country is so small?
Yeah, we spoke about that before, and I think on the continent, renting property is a lot more common in comparison to obviously in Britain, but it is like I think it is kind of ingrained in people in this country to own your own home rather than rent, and I think that does have an effect on the size of the buy-to-let market.
Mm-hmm. I mean, let's talk about increasing your yield. So keep reviewing your mortgage. The fast track to increasing your yield of any buy-to-let is to reduce your monthly outgoings. That's the reality, because then you get more money in, therefore your yield's going to be higher. If you're already on a variable rate, you almost certainly make the instant savings by remortgaging at a fixed rate. That's key here, Kessa. Do you think it's a good time to actually remortgage to fixed rates now?
Absolutely. Like Richard was saying earlier on, you know, it definitely what investors can do with getting a review of their portfolio, because often people will buy a property and then not realize that it's now kind of moved on to variable rate. The variable rate could be, you know, double what they could get on a fixed rate mortgage just now. So potentially they could reduce that by half, and even extract, you know, more equity out and, you know, take that out and still have a lower payment than they're paying currently. So it's definitely worth reviewing.
So you talk about taking equity out, and I'll give a word of warning to everybody, and I know this because one of my friends previously, and before the credit crunch, had 300 properties. Now his strategy was to take 1% of the value out every single year to live on. You should never take out money from your equity, in my opinion. You should never take out any money in my opinion, unless it's been reinvested in assets that will produce income again. Don't take it out to live on. It's the cash flow, it'll provide that, if anything. But that's another strategy as well. That's like, you know, you only live on a fraction of what you actually generate. And if not, you live on none of it and it all gets reinvested every single time. And you go and work your own job while you've got a letting agent looking after your portfolio. That's the reality, because you can probably make more money in your own job. But that's another total difference. So I could be here forever. In fact, I'm writing a book on it. So my book will be out by the end of the year about this. So increasing your yield. Most of the landlords fix their rates between 2 and 5 years. Is that right?
Yeah, that's right. That's the most popular options.
It does give them the certainty, doesn't it, though? It gives them that certainty of the outgoings will be the same every single time. Therefore, they're able to plan for the future. And we know ourselves that rents will go up. What's going to happen when the Scottish Government bring in the rent controls? Is anybody worried about this?
Not really. I mean, not really, because I think rents are really good. I think it depends what, obviously, what it's going to be like, but I'm not really worried about it at the moment.
My thoughts on it. Kessa, you got any thoughts on that? Rent controls?
Yeah, I think it's very interesting, a very topical subject. Personally, I think if we do get rent controls, we'll see rent prices increase.
Yeah.
Often as landlords, we don't always kind of increase our rents, but if these rent controls come in, where we have the opportunity to increase rents, in line with whatever they kind of say that will be each year, we will start to increase those. And if I was at below market rates as well, then we'll kind of bring them up to the market rate. So. Yeah, I think it'll be an interesting subject, but I would see, or potentially would see that rents will increase over that time.
Yeah, I see rent controls as an opportunity to take advantage of it.
It's amazing how
there's huge scope in rent controls to do that and take advantage of that market. Let's talk about the increased yields again and fixed rates. For existing fixed rates coming to an end in the next 6 months or so, it's well worth reviewing your mortgage. Is that probably the best thing to do, Kessa? Review it now?
Absolutely. There's no harm in doing a review, to be honest, because if you're on a decent rate, then that's fine. You know you're on a good rate, and then you don't need to do anything. But interest rates are so competitive just now on buy-to-let mortgages. It's definitely worth looking at.
Yeah, I mean, it's as well. It's even worth reviewing the current mortgage you have just now as well, because even though if you're on a fixed rate, I've seen sometimes where I've been on a fixed rate, and it's actually made more sense to actually get rid of the fixed rate and actually put it on a different fixed rate, because the differential or the opportunity cost or loss was actually a lot less than what I could gain more on the other one. So in other words, I paid an early repayment charge of £2,000, but the new fixed rate was guaranteeing me almost a £5,000 saving over the next 5 years, and that makes absolute sense to me. So it gave me certainty as well. So I've often done that in the past, but again, that's people's individual circumstances, and they need to come to someone like you to assess that, don't they?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, like I said, it's balancing up if it's worth paying that early redemption charge or not.
Yeah. Let's talk about improving your properties. If buy-to-let is showing your age, won't achieve its maximum rent or its full-time income potential. That's the key here. So there's a balance between improvement and actually improvement and not improving in order to get the maximum rental return. Richard, this is your field. At what point do you stop improving far too much? It's not worth it anymore. The incremental gain isn't worth it.
No, I think, and I do see it quite a lot, and have to kind of rein people in and be like, look, you're taking this to the level where it kind of crosses into, like, when they're doing improvements to properties and things, and bringing it to a level
where gold caps on.
Yeah, all the fixtures and fittings which are way over and above standard, which aren't necessary in a rental property. I mean, obviously things need to be comfortable and at a certain level where people can make it their home and have good maybe functionings in the property, but you don't need to overspend. And I think once you start doing that, it's all about being smart, and I think looking at your costs and things. And again, it comes to numbers. It's like being a smart investor or landlord, whether that be obviously reviewing your portfolio and looking at your mortgages and looking at what equity you have, and then also looking at your expenditure and what you put into a property as well. You really need to be smart when you do that, or the numbers will not add up, and then that affects your cash flow.
It's numbers at the end of the day. That's really what it comes down to, and it's understanding the dynamics. But again, it's worth speaking to an estate agent. I mean, do we know any good estate agents about here? Hello. But it's true though, isn't it? I mean, I'm in a very privileged position because I'm in the estate agency market, I'm in the letting market, and I'm also a buy-to-let investor and a buy-to-let landlord. So I have the beauty of understanding the whole dynamics in order to understand the whole way it should be done. And I often forget that, and it just comes straight off my head, and folk just look at me as if I've got, it just goes straight over them. But it's easy and understandable if you understand that market, and you'll understand that, Kessa, and you'll understand that, Richard, as well. So kitchens, we're not looking for the highest spec German kitchen, are we? We're looking at what, Howdens?
Yeah, Howdens are quite good actually. They've got like a basic range, a mid range, and then they've got obviously their kind of superior range, which people would probably put in their own homes. But mid range kitchens are relatively.
So Howdens, B&Q, where else? Homebase. Homebase still exist?
Yeah, they still exist. They do kitchens.
Magnet. Kessa, who do you use?
Yeah, so I tend to use Magnet. If anybody's out there interested in getting, some better rates with Magnet, there's a company called LMPG, which a lot of landlords use, and then you get preferential rates with Magnet.
Yeah, although they're white goods are a lot more. I've just found that out recently. that's probably where they make up for the difference. So you have to understand, you have to just do your shopping as well and make sure you've got the right things. But the LMPG buying groups actually are a really good option. I had somebody recently refurb, Gary Wallace refurb one of my properties, and he did it through that situation. And it was it was perfect. It was
good. That was a good one.
He managed to refurb the whole thing for 10,000 all in. New kitchen, new shower room, new carpets, new decoration, new wiring, new smoke detectors, new. That's when I found out about white goods, and also the boiler as well got newly put in as well. So that then increased the value. This was a property valued at 60,000. I got it for 45. I spent £10,000 on doing it up. Therefore, it was 55 all in. But potentially the valuation is probably sitting about 80,000 now. So if I want to, I could just do a loan to value, bring all the 75% of the mortgage back out, and basically get all my money back out, if not a wee bit more cash than I put in the first place. That's a good strategy, Kessler, isn't it?
It sounds like a win-win to me.
For that one as well.
Infinite returns, as long as the numbers work, isn't it? That's really what it comes down to, isn't it? Let's quickly look at some of these numbers, because I'm a spreadsheet guru. I love this. So can everybody see this all right?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. So we've got 70,000. We've got 4% stamp duty, ADS, 25% in. So we've got 17,500. Kessa, you keep me right on this. What is the mortgage rate for individual just now, roughly? What's the best deal out there?
Well, below 2%, to be honest. But if you base your numbers on 2.5%, you wouldn't be far wrong. You know,
so 2.5%. We're usually looking at about £1,000 arrangement fee, aren't we?
Yeah, approximately. Yeah.
Yeah. And Richard, property you're buying at 70,000. Would you think about 450 rent?
Yeah, too bad. About 450 comfortably.
Yeah. Okay, so we're assuming 12 months occupancy. We're also, and then we're assuming the mortgage rate. So basically, cash flow after the rentals brought in every month at 12 months occupancy. That's 100% occupancy rate is 338 per month after the mortgage is paid. That's the most important thing after the mortgage is paid. Now, if you bought this for cash, you'd have a 7.7% gross yield. That's if you bought for cash. In other words, if you put 70,000 down with 7.7. But if you use the bank's money and leverage that, your yield now goes to 23%. This is talking about leverage. So your differential in there is 16% on the bank's money in terms of where you were before and where you are now. Your overheads stay the same regardless of if you buy with cash or if you buy without cash, because your overheads after the mortgage is always the same anyway. It's always going to be things like, what is the overheads in a buy-to-let property, Richard? Letting agent fees?
Yeah, you have your management fee and things.
Insurance.
And your landlord's insurance, and also think about obviously potential repairs and things as well.
Just potential repairs. So your letting agent would be about 15% all in terms of the cost. So that's why I put 30%, because 15% to cover everything else. And then your net return on your deposit, which is your 22, that is your stamp duty plus your deposit plus. This would be your legals at £1,000, and any minor improvements before you get the property is 22,000 in. So you've got an 11% net return on that money. So basically, you've got 22,000 in, you've got 11% net return. If you increase by 2% every year in appreciation, we know that's probably more achievable than ever. Over the next 10 years, you'll make 172% return on investment. That's a good deal, isn't it?
Yeah.
So what's the best rate for a limited company just now, Kessa?
Yeah, I think if you base your numbers on 3.5%, there's some rates kind of even below 3%, but yeah 3.5.
So that then changes the dynamics to an 8.6% return. But that's still better than what we're getting in the bank? Zero. Nothing. You're actually negative interest rates in the bank because you've got inflation eroding at your savings and you're not really getting anything but 0.001%. So every single year. Now, this doesn't take into account capital appreciation because it's there. Now, remember when I said that capital appreciation would go up 20% possible in the next 4 years? The value of your property is actually 70,000. So it's 20% of 70,000, not 20% of what you've got in. And that is the power of leverage that goes on top of that. That's a quick one. Anyway, I thought I'd just cover some of the numbers just so people understand the dynamics of that. Richard, what were you going to say?
Yeah, I think what's good about the spreadsheet is it clearly demonstrates that I think a lot of people, maybe if they've got cash in the bank and think, right, I'm going to do buy-to-let, they instantly think, right, let's just buy cash outright. But I think it's important to look at, it's probably better to fund it through mortgage, obviously.
Now, would you, Kesser, this is an interesting one that Richard posed on there now. Would you buy with mortgage first, or would you buy with cash first and then remortgage?
Yeah, it's a good question, and everybody's different. It depends on your circumstances and maybe the type of property that you're buying as well. Sometimes investors will use cash when they're looking to add value to that property, so they can kind of benefit from getting cheaper funding because it's their own funding, to buy it cash, and then add the value to the property, and then extract that onto a buy-to-let mortgage, and then raise the finance that way. Or often, if the property is not mortgageable to start off with, if it's in a really run-down state, they might use cash for that. But if it's a property that's going to rent out from day one, typically most investors will use a buy-to-let mortgage outright.
Yeah, it is the opportunity to add value first. So the first instinct is, where can you add value straight away to increase the price? That's the key about speaking to an estate agent first as well, before you go ahead and buy it, or after even you've bought it, and then you could decide whether you take the mortgage out now or later on. But it's important to do that. The classic example is the one I just talked about now, is I bought it for 45. And then I've actually spent 10,000 on it. But then by the time the value is significantly more now, I'll then remortgage that back out. I'll get all the money back out, and it'll be an infinite return. Effectively, an infinite return. Where else can you get an asset class where you've got no money in and you're actually getting paid for it? Is there anything else that exists like that? No.
I don't know if there is.
I can't think of anything that exists that you've got no money in it anymore and you're still making money out of it. That is remarkable, and I have always seen this over the last 30 years, but I always used to think, how does nobody else see this? But it's evidently a lot more people are beginning to see it, like yourselves, Kesser, and Richard. You can see that for other people as well, can't you?
Yeah.
Okay, so let's talk about and the improvement of your properties. And what about tax efficiency? Next, tax efficiency. When we talk about buy-to-let finance, it's not always about borrowing from the banks, and how you pay tax on your rental portfolio will impact your business as much as the interest rate, really. So this comes down to limited company and sole trader, doesn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Sorry, Richard, you go.
No, you go, Kesser. That's fine.
Yeah, I think obviously you need to get good tax advice from, potentially like a tax advisor or accountant who specializes in property. But yeah, a lot of investors are now opting to go limited company for that reason, for the potential tax benefits.
You've also got the benefit as well, is you can pass a limited company shares on without actually ending. Whereas if the properties are in your name, and you pop your clogs, that's it. The mortgage has ended. Whereas if you've got it in a limited company and you've got succession planning, then the limited company is a legal entity in its own right, and the mortgage will pass with a limited company. Is that sort of the rule of thumb, Kesser?
Yeah, absolutely. A lot of investors are now thinking about succession planning, even when they're at a young age, how are they going to bring other family members into this limited company in the future, gifting them shares, giving them kind of different classes of shares as well, so they can potentially take an income from the limited company, dividends. There's kind of so many different things out there now. Whilst in personal name, if it's in your personal name and you might want to kind of give it to, somebody else, then it's got to be a sale and a purchase, and then there's kind of tax implications, and we've got LBTT or ADS and stuff like that to consider as well.
So, in your opinion, who's the best tax accountant just now? This is putting you on the spot, isn't it?
Oh, yeah. Well, there's loads out there, to be honest. I'm not sure on that question. Probably I'll put that one back to you, Jim, if you know somebody in the local area that's really good.
The difficulty for me is it's me, because I'm an accountant by trade. So the reality is, I understand the dynamics, I understand it, and if I want an answer to something, I know who to ask to get that. So that's where I've never really, the one I use now and the one I've always used is Patterson Boyd. Patterson Boyd's been a good one. They've not been, they've not really been in a position, but I've never really asked them to be in a position to actually advise me on property, because they know fine that I know the answers before they give me the answers, and I probably know a lot more than they know because it's something I've specialised in for the last 30 years. So when people ask that question, do you know a good tax accountant? It's like, well, I didn't want to volunteer myself. It's like, I got in this business to be free. I never got in this business to have a job for somebody else. That's effectively it. But Richard, have you come across this question as well?
Yeah, I mean, tax could be quite a difficult thing for people to navigate through and understand. And I think it's important that then, if you don't, I mean, not everyone has all the answers, so it's important to know the right people to go to find the answer. And I think if you're an investor with a portfolio and it's in a limited company, it's important to treat it like a business and look at the tax aspect for that. And then, like I say, speak to the right people, whether that be yourself or somebody else, Jim.
It's what do you do as well? I mean, you know, I'm transitioning because originally in the early days, we bought a lot of properties in our own names, my wife and I. So we're transitioning a lot of properties into our limited companies, plus buying all the new ones in the limited company for that purpose. Because the rules have actually changed since then. So my advice is always do limited company, unless there's a compelling reason why you would need to do sole trader, because it was a better tax advantage for you. It's a complicated area, definitely, and it needs a specialist tax advisor to do that. But it is difficult to actually find somebody out there with that fundamental knowledge. And to be honest, I am actually still looking for that type of person. So it is another person I need to add to my power team, if that makes sense. There's also the other ones is, I mean, tax efficiency wise, there's a lot of expenses you can claim now. I remember in the early days, you weren't allowed to claim straight away double glazing, because double glazing was deemed to be a capital improvement. And it meant it had to go on the end value of property, so you weren't allowed to deduct it against your income just now. And it was only when I first started, a couple of years in, that the taxman actually changed that, and subsequently had to pay me tax back. Hey. That's the only time the taxman visited me, and he actually had to pay me money back after the end of the visit. And he's never crossed my door ever again. And he's never come to me ever, because he's like, he did remark at the time, he says, it's remarkable how your records are so well detailed for a landlord. I've never seen that before. I never told him I was an accountant. But he was actually quite surprised. He's never appeared back again, and no one ever has. So owning a property in a company or an individual, it can affect your liabilities, in particular in capital gains and inheritance tax. Capital gains as well is a big one just now.
Yeah.
Capital gains, the Office of Tax Simplification has actually put out a white paper back in November last year. And I have a blog on this to talk about this in detail. But they're actually recommending to streamline to the government to simplify the capital gains rules, which means that potentially if you've got property in your own hands, instead of having the 18% and 28% capital gains tax, they're going to do away with that and put it back to tapered relief. In other words, indexation. So everything that you bought right now, you're going to face a higher tax bill. Plus, they're actually thinking about reducing, or their recommendation is to reduce the actual capital gains allowance for a personal individual. So again, it's not going to make it worth any sense in the future to actually possibly buy in your own name. I also say that if you've got property in your own name just now, think about selling it to the limited company if it's got a higher value to alleviate your capital gains position. Because my wife and I have both allowances. Therefore, if I have it in my own name or she will have it in joint names, we can both sell and take advantage of a £25,000 capital gains allowance in the increase, and actually pay no tax on that, and sell it to a limited company and actually get it remortgaged at that higher value, plus the fact we've still got the asset and we earn money on it. Job's done, eh? Win-win situation. Again, another great strategy. Final words, Kester, on this.
Yeah, I think it's all great points that you put in there, Jim. I think there's going to be a lot of landlords out there thinking about their portfolios now and what they want to do. And we've seen a lot of people, since COVID's hit, reevaluating their lives and, what they're doing with that cash that's sitting in the bank. And we've now seen the way inflation rates are. So a lot of people are going to be looking at property investment and seeing if that's kind of going to be the strategy going forward. So speaking to people like yourself and Richard, going forward and seeing what opportunities are out there, it's very exciting times to be a property investor. And like you said, we're not seeing this market shrinking at any point soon. We're going to see this expand over time. So I think it's very exciting times for property investors going forward.
What about yourself, Richard, quickly?
Yeah, I think that, be smart if you're an investor. Obviously, regularly assess and have a look at your portfolio and see what the kind of status is of, obviously, your mortgages and things, and what kind of rates you're on. Speak to the right people. And I think if you're on the fence and you are a buy-to-let investor and on the fence about buying just now, is it the right time? The time is now.
Yeah. My final thoughts is, could you imagine on a Monday morning the alarm goes off? It doesn't need to go off because you don't have to get up for work. That's the reality. That Sunday night feeling of sinking, you've got work the next day, has completely disappeared because you've chosen to build a buy-to-let portfolio, which has given you residual income, which gives you the choices you want to do when you want to do it. picture a time when you think about it, you could actually be watching the Masters in the US and you just turn to your partner and say, let's get on a plane and go there. And the next day you're standing there watching the Masters in your shorts and t-shirt and you're thinking this is amazing because buy-to-let can do that for you. This is an asset class that can produce a lifestyle that you will have forever and you can pass to the next generation. That's what property investment does for you. So if you need to message us, you can message us direct. You can contact us on the usual numbers. You can speak to Kester individually, Richard individually, or myself individually. But now is the time to invest in property. It always is now, the answer. Property prices are completely irrelevant if you get the numbers and dynamics right in this process. And that's us. Thank you very much for watching the Fife Property Show.
Jim.
And we'll see you all next week for next week's episode. Bye-bye for now.